Hi everyone and welcome to this video. In this video, we're going to understand some of the SQL concepts. So let's get started. SQL Server Instance. The instance of SQL Server is a single install component of SQL Server. It is a collection of user databases associated with the instance. You can install numerous instances of SQL Server on a single server with one default instance and the rest being named instance. So as you can see on my screenshot over here, you have, when you connect to your SQL server, it will ask you to provide you your server name. And if you have multiple instances, as in my case, you will click for browse for more, and under the database engine you will be able to see all your server name over here. And as the definition suggests, you'll have one default instance. As you can see, I have one default instance, and the rest will be a name instance. As you can see, I have one with my default instance /SQL Server Express _2019. So that is my name instance. You need to also note that you can create as many as SQL Server instances as you can. However, they will all share the same underlying CPU, memory, network, and storage resources. SQL Server Service. The SQL Server Service is the main Windows service that controls whether the SQL Server instance is started or stopped. Each SQL Server instance has a corresponding Windows service. This Windows service can be configured to run with a domain account to access resources on the network or using a local system account. SQL Server Agent. SQL Server Agent is responsible for running jobs on a predefined schedule. Jobs can include TSQL, PowerShell, SSIS, Python, R, and many other commands. Operators can be configured and notified via email or text when a job completes, fails, or succeeds. SQL Server Agent also includes alerts that can be configured for when performance or operational thresholds are met. And as you can see on the screenshot over here, I have a SQL Server Agent and I've created a job to do a database backup. Relational Database Management System. SQL Server is one of many relational database management systems on the market, such as Oracle, PostgreSQL, Microsoft Azure, SQL, and MySQL, to name a few. The Relational Database Management System manages all of the databases, data, transactional integrity, security, user access, and many more. This could be for data warehouse projects, business intelligence, and more. SQL Server Database. A database is a logical container for data structures with specific name. Permissions can be granted at the database level, but permissions are generally better suited to be granted to an application that a user needs at the object level, such as stored procedure, table, or view. Types of database. As you can see, there are two types of database. One is the default database, and the second one is a user-defined database, which is created by the user. System database. When you install SQL Server, the system databases will come pre-installed, and these are some of the system databases that will get pre-installed. You'll have the master DB, which contains all the server configuration settings. You will have the model DB, which serves as a template that is used when user databases are created. You have the MS DB, stores all SQL Server Agent related tables and stored procedures. And you have the temp DB, which stores all temporary objects that are required by the system. These objects can include tables, indexes, views, users, and many more. The user database is a database that is created by a database administrator, DBA, or a developer to suit an application needed by a business. Each user database on a SQL Server instance has a unique name and has a database owner, which is generally the login who created the database. SQL Server Database Files. SQL Server Database has 3 files. The The first one is the .mdf file. The .mdf file is responsible for storing all of the objects such as tables, views, stored procedures, etc. that are also associated with the database. Each SQL database must have a .mdf file, and only one MDF file can exist per database. Second one is a NDF file. SQL Server NDF file is a secondary data file to support a physical SQL Server database. Although it is not mandatory for SQL Server database, an NDF file can support tables and indexes. NDF files are created for SQL Server databases to store a database across numerous disk drives to improve performance or support the database growth. The third one is the .ldf file. The LDF file supports the database transaction log, which stores before and after versions of records to enable a transaction to roll back and to maintain data integrity. SQL Server Schema. A schema is a logical container within a database to grant permissions to particular objects. By default, each SQL server has a DBO and sys schema. Although the user-defined objects can be created in the DBO schema, it is generally recommended to create a separate schema for each logical application, such as sales, inventory, accounting, etc. SQL Server provides us with some predefined schemas which have the same names as the built-in database users and roles. For example, DBO, sys, guest, information underscore schema. Note that SQL Server reserves the sys and information underscore schema for system objects. Therefore, you cannot create or drop any objects in these schemas. SQL Server Table. A table is a logical structure to store data related to a single entity, such as customer, product, order, etc. Each table has one or more columns. Each column should be configured with the appropriate data type and null setting. SQL Server Data Types. Data types are defined for columns in tables and parameters for stored procedures, functions, and queries. Common data types are int, datetime, varchar, char. Referential Integrity. Referential integrity refers to the accuracy and consistency of data within a relationship. In relationships, data is linked between two or more tables. This is achieved by having a foreign key, which is in the associated table, with a reference to a primary key, which is in the parent table. Because of this, we need to ensure that data on both sides of the relationship remain intact. So, the referential integrity requires that whenever a foreign key value is used, it must reference a valid existing primary key in the parent table. And as you can see in the diagram over here, there is a primary table over here, which is the employee, which is the company ID, and you have the related table over here. And as you can see, the primary ID over here for company ID is 1, and it matches with the related table. 2 is not available over here, or rather 15 is not available over here, which makes this table, which makes this particular row a orphaned row, and then this means this is a associated record. SQL Server Primary Key. A primary key is a column that uniquely identifies a row in a table. A table should have a primary key to uniquely identify each row. SQL Server Foreign Key. A foreign key is a column that relates to another table to ensure data is consistent. And as you can see in the diagram below, you have a table over here called employee, and you have another table D over here, and as you can see, there's a foreign key over here, department ID, that connects to this department ID, and there it becomes a relationship. SQL Server Indexes. SQL Server Indexes are physical structures that are built to improve data access performance. This is similar to an index of a book, which helps us locate a specific chapter in the book. Without an index, a table scan will occur, which means that SQL Server Query Processor is scanning the table from the top which is the first till the last row to complete the query. Table scan is bad performance, just like scanning for a chapter in a book with no index. SQL Server Indexes example. And as you can see, I have a table over here and I have a query. And in this query, I would like to get a salary for greater than 5,000 and less than 7,000. And as you can see over here, our salary column over here is not in ascending order. Neither there is an index that has been created which can fetch this. To run this query, the query engine has to check for each and every row in the table, which results in the table scan. This affects the performance, especially if the table is large. Now, suppose if we create an index, so that is the script that I will use to create an index onto the employee table, and then I will set up my order as salary ascending. Now, on the left hand side is the table that I have actually created. It was created. On the right hand side, this is a new index that I have created over here. And as you can see, the salary column is set up in the ascending order, and you have the row addresses, which for the purpose of this example, I have just placed a row address, but it will be in hexadecimal numbers. So what will the indexes do? So SQL Server will now pick the row addresses from the index and directly fetch the records from the table. So if I run that same query, it will go over here and it will fetch it. It will go over here and it will look at the salary and then go to the row address of it and fetch the data and then execute it for me. Indexes also needs to be maintained, rebuilt, which is rebuilt or reorganized on a regular basis, either weekly, monthly, or quarterly. Types of indexes. SQL Server ships are numerous types of SQL Server indexes that provide all specific value based on the need. The SQL Server indexes include the two most common, which is the clustered index and the non-clustered index. Other indexes are some of the types of the indexes, but they're not common compared to clustered index and non-clustered index. SQL Server Stored Procedure. A stored procedure is an object created within a database and schema which includes business logic to perform a discrete operation such as retrieve, add, modify, or delete data. Stored procedures are written with TSQL code and permissions are granted to execute the code. Stored procedures are given a logical name. 0 or 1 or many parameters can be passed into a stored procedure, and 1 or more result sets can be returned by a single stored procedure. Once a stored procedure is created, it can be modified with an alter command or deleted with a dropped command. SQL Server Query. A query is written with TSQL code and is not stored within a database, but rather with an external file, which is .sql. The user executing the query needs to have permissions to the tables and views that are accessed with the query. The query can be used to retrieve, add, modify, or delete data. A query can have 1 or more parameters as well as 1 or more result sets. SQL Server Function. There are two types of SQL Server functions, system and user-defined. System functions are created by Microsoft and shipped with SQL Server. System functions perform string manipulations, date calculations, statistical calculations, and many more. These functions are fairly generic and used across numerous applications. User-defined functions are created by developers and DBAs at specific organizations to meet a particular business need. The user-defined functions can be a scalar valued, which returns a single value, inline table valued, which returns multiple columns, or multi-statement table valued, which returns multiple rows and columns. SQL Server View. A view in SQL is simply a virtual table. The code that comprises the view is select statement that accesses 1 or more tables via a join statement. A view can be used to simplify a complex query or to simplify reporting for power users. Permissions for users or groups should be granted to views. SQL Server View example. I have a query over here and I have selected all the employees over here, but I would like to join the department table. Now, whenever I use my SQL scripting, I always have to join a department table to get the employee's department. Rather than every time creating the same script over and over again, what I can do is I can create a view. And so what I do is I'll just add two statements along my line, create view in the table, and also a statement as S, and then below would be my statement over here. So I'm not including just the department table, but I'm also including the business entity code and the employee department history as well. And now if you see under my views folder, you will see that there is a view created as human resources dot employee department, and this department includes the employee ID that I had wanted to fetch. So now whenever I have to write a query, I can use this view to write a query or to modify my existing view query over here. SQL Server Management Studio. SQL Server Management Studio, also known as SSMS, enables you to connect to instances of the database engine, integration services, reporting services, and analysis services which are on premises. From an administration perspective, SSMS enables DBAs to write TSQL code to perform tasks such as backups, restores, configure databases, tune performance, schedule jobs, and many more. From a development perspective, SSMS enables developers and business intelligence professions to build tables, stored procedures, views, functions, and many more. SQL Server Profiler. The SQL Server Profiler has been a long-standing client-side tool run by DBAs or developers to capture each and every line of code in the form of events being executed against an SQL Server instance to tune the performance. Profiler can generate a tremendous amount of data and potentially impact the performance of the monitored system if not configured correctly on a already text SQL instance. Profiler can be fine-tuned to only capture event data for specific users, databases, time periods, etc. Profiler can be written onto a table for further analysis or text file. In general, Profiler has been replaced by extended events due to the performance implications, but some of the SQL professionals still prefer to use Profiler for ad hoc or specific performance tuning cases. SQL Server Extended Events. In many respects, SQL Server Extended Events has grown out of the original SQL Server Profiler and Server Site Trace functionality. Many of the same events and configurations are available in extended events in the SQL Server Management Studio wizard or TSQL code. Extended events can be run to perform data collections for performance tuning or monitor for operational items such as a database that goes offline. SQL Server also ships with some default extended event sessions and templates which can be used as a starting point to collect data. Keep in mind that this data can become large very quickly, so it is not a configure it and forget it situation. It is necessary to capture the needed events and associated data, then monitor this process as a portion of your daily task. SQL Server Maintenance Plan. SQL Server maintenance plans are included in SQL Server Management Studio as a point-and-click option to perform SQL Server Database backups, rebuild indexes in SQL, reorganize indexes in SQL, SQL Server DBCC check DB, and many more. The SQL Server maintenance plans are actually SQL Server integration services packages that are created and saved to the instance. Database plans can be configured for all databases and scheduled to run on a regular basis. Depending on the workload for SQL Server environment, maintenance can be scheduled at night, over the weekend, on a monthly basis, etc. The benefit of performing the SQL Server database management is to ensure the databases are free of corruption and able to achieve high performance. Well, that is all everyone. I hope you have enjoyed watching this video. If so, please consider subscribing to this channel. I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.